All right, we're going to get started. Good morning. My name is Paresh Suthar. I'm an architect with the CTO concept development team at Microsoft. This is Matt Augustine. He's a software development engineer in the same group. And today we're going to go over a few things regarding some really interesting technologies that are hopefully going to help the entire web community become more wired, allowing interconnectivity, better communication. And essentially, we're focusing on two main areas. We're going to be focusing on live clipboard, which is a concept that some of you may have heard of, as well as simple sharing extensions, another concept you might have heard of. They both offer interesting aspects, and individually they have value. What is really interesting is when they're combined, their value increases. So what we're going to do is going to have some brief slides. We're going to go through some demos, and we'd like to ask that if you can, hold the questions until the end, because we're going to try to cover a lot today. So we're going to start with live clipboard. So Ray Ozzie introduced this concept a few weeks ago at O'Reilly's Emerging Technology Conference. And he started off by talking how companies were investing in web services, XML, service-oriented architectures for interoperability. The idea is trying to share data between systems. In essence, the idea is to create a programmatic mesh. There are multiple types of meshes that we're familiar with today. A very popular one is the mashup, essentially the idea that composite applications are created by web developers, and they're seamlessly combining content from multiple sources. There are some issues or challenges that people are facing, though. There is no real clear path for users to create a mesh for web applications. In other words, without having multiple web apps collude together to interact with each other, there isn't a good system. And users need a clear way to interact with this information. How do they exchange structured information from website to website? We shouldn't stop there. It shouldn't just be website to website. We should bring desktop applications into the fold as well. So how do we allow for information that starts at the web or starts at the desktop make its way to either destination, again, to the web or to another desktop location? Well, many people are familiar with the concept of a clipboard. The clipboard exists today. Most people use it to do things like copy a section of text from one application to another. And essentially what they're doing is they're always creating a copy of the data. In other words, by value copying from one text field to another, even in web apps or desktop apps. There's also an advanced mechanism for using the clipboard. Some of you are familiar with the idea that desktop applications can create subscriptions between applications. Examples of this have included things like Olé, the idea that you copy some content and you establish a relationship between the source and the target so that updates are talking to each application and flowing automatically once that connection is established. So, live clipboard, what is it? Well, the idea again is to enable users to copy structured information from a website to another website or a website to a desktop application. Not only by value, but by reference again. The idea that you can create a subscription model, you can publish some information, and you can subscribe to it. So what you're going to see are multiple aspects to the live clipboard. You're going to see that there's an XML data format that represents what we're representing as the clipboard content. You're going to see some UI controls, as well as an optional desktop application component that creates a richer experience on the desktop side. Now, the XML data format can be representing the content in essentially three ways. We sort of created a partitioning. The idea was that there's structured data, there are feeds, and then there's a presentation format. And we can get more into that later, but the idea is, again, creating structured mechanisms for applications to exchange information. The UI control I mentioned, it's really a way to provide a consistent user experience so that when an operation that's relevant to the clipboard, like copy, paste, cut, is performed, this UI control uses techniques of HTML and JavaScript to capture the content as well as to paste the content in other locations, and at the same time trying to leverage mechanisms or means by which users are already familiar with doing so. For example, using context menus, using edit menus, etc. And we'll see some of this in the demo. Lastly, there's a desktop application, an optional component that we've created for the demo. And the idea is that anytime we're using the structured information and we're putting that content onto the clipboard, this desktop component can grab onto that and provide additional, richer representations of the same data. So there's three main aspects, again, to the live clipboard: the XML data format, the HTML and JavaScript control, and then the optional desktop application component. So how does it work? Well, what we're hoping is that over the course of time, as people embrace the live clipboard, web pages will add the live clipboard UI control to their pages and reuse the script that we'll be providing so that you can essentially get a consistent user experience on your web pages. And we can go into deeper technical detail, but the main idea behind the script is that there are callbacks that occur within JavaScript that you can put your own code sections into to do things like tell what is going to be pasted or to interpret what has been pasted. And again, it's all XML. And we'll take a look at these sample XML data formats as we go through the demo. Now, the whole idea is that when you paste information, we're encouraging in this XML data format to provide as many representations of the data as possible. So the simplest example is everyone understands text, and that's great, but you'll see that there's different ways to represent the content, which includes microformats, which includes IANA-based types. We'll also, again, see that the desktop application is taking that clipboard content, and for those of you familiar with the clipboard on the Windows operating system, there's this type called CF text, which is essentially textual representation of content. This desktop application is taking that CF text and it's making it richer. It can turn it into CF HTML. It can turn it into a CF hdrop for file-based applications. And we've leveraged that to create a really powerful user experience on the desktop with content that's originated from the web. So at this point, we're going to go into the demo. I'm going to let Matt take over.
Okay. So we'll start with a sample page. This just shows the web control as Parrish described. Here I have a few contacts and some calendar entries in HCal and HCard format. These are micro formats, but actually any format can be put on live clipboard. So as you can see, I can right-click, copy, right-click, paste. It jumped around a little bit, but what happens when I copy is the data associated with this contact gets put on the live clipboard in HCard format. And then when I paste, similarly, a callback for this data region gets called and it passes the live clipboard format data to it, and then it can update the page. So this is using standard DHTML, standard JavaScript, and so there's no ActiveX control, et cetera. So over here, we see a sample of what the live clip format looks like. And you see there's multiple formats, one of them being the micro format that I talked about earlier. The other is actually a vCard, iCal format, right?
Yep.
So you can see it doesn't have to be XML, but it can.
Yeah, and one thing to note here is because we're using Firefox, the content's actually enclosed within a CData section. It's just that the CData attribute's been stripped out. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at this content.
Right. So this part is in a CData section. Okay. So here is a sample site, eventful. You see there's, an event here. And here you see the live clip icon. So that's the same control that was on the sample page. When I copy, it copies that to the clipboard. And then I can come to a totally different website with that same control. In this case, my Windows Live Mail calendar page. Paste, and you see that same appointment shows up there. Now, this destination page can display it in any format that it wants. It gets access to the actual data behind the event rather than a simple presentation. So this is a lot better than selecting some HTML copy and then paste because it gives you access to the actual structured data behind it. So now this is still on the clipboard. And in this case, we're running the Windows desktop app that Paris described earlier. This is an optional app, but since we're running it, what it did was it sensed that live clip format got copied onto CFText, and it went through the various formats in that and converted them to other formats that Windows apps can more easily understand. So in this case, we copied in HCal, which is a micro format, and then it converted into iCal, which is understood by Outlook. So we can see that now. So if I go to Outlook and paste, actually see this is native. We didn't modify Outlook at all. So all the data, including the description, which you didn't see in the web page itself, get pasted into the target. So I can save that and add it to my calendar. Okay. Coming back to the web, this is a good example of how limited copy and paste are today on the web. I mean, what people would normally do in a form like this, if they wanted to copy from one to another, they would have to select individual text fields and paste into each field, and it's just really a time-consuming process. So here, another component of our web clipbook app is we can have some recently copied items, or you can keep items around that you might frequently copy and paste into another area. So here we see Ray is at the ThinkGeek site. He's at checkout. He wants to fill in his shipping and billing information, and he's done that. He does that a lot, so he has these in this little app already. So he wants to ship to his work address, so I'm just going to copy, and that copies into live clipboard format into CFText, and go over here, paste, and you can see it it filled out the whole form. So this is up to the site itself to determine what it should do when it gets a live clip pasted into it. So in this case, it can say, well, this is HCard information, and I'll apply the first name, last name into the appropriate fields, et cetera. Similarly, let's say he wants to get billed on his personal Visa. Just copy this, paste, and now you see that the information is already filled in, and that saves a lot of time. Okay, next, we see a typical blog. Over here, this is pretty common these days. We see all these different icons for adding a subscription to a feed for this blog into various web aggregators. We think this is a little bit over the top. So in the next example, you'll see what it might look like if we replace all of that with live clip. So here you see just the live clip icon again. And if I copy it, since live clip can support feeds in multiple formats, this site could put, Atom, RSS, it could put different versions of feeds for full content, headlines, et cetera. So I copied it. Now I'm going to go to Bloglines, which is a web aggregator, paste, and you see that it added the subscription. So in this case, you see if they simply support live clipboard, then any web aggregator, desktop aggregator, et cetera, that wants to support the format can be pasted into, and you don't have to have a specific button for each different aggregator to add your feed.
Yeah, and we're hoping that a lot of people will take advantage of this because our goal is to empower users again. The idea is that the user shouldn't have to care how they subscribe to a feed. They just know they want to do it. So in the example you just saw, they copied a reference to the feed and they pasted it. We're hoping that we can make it that simple for all types of interactions with this live clipboard concept.
Right. Okay. Here you see Ray's space, and he has some profile information. And assume for the purposes of the demo that his current location is somehow being updated in almost real time from a wireless device. Now, he also has a profile here on Facebook, and this is pretty common today. People have multiple kind of social networking / expression sites, and you end up having to fill out your same profile information on each different site, and they might get out of sync, et cetera. So in this case, he wants to add that current location to Facebook, but he doesn't want to have to go through a lengthy process of setting that up. So he's going to go to his space, copy, and what this does is it copies both the static data that's shown here plus a URL to a feed that will provide updates to that same data. So we go back to Facebook, paste, and now you see in red here that same data from his space shows up immediately. But in addition to that, you see up here this other icon. Now this basically shows that, hey, you have a feed available for live updates from the Spaces profile that we just copied from. And so he's going to select that, close, and from now on, anytime he updates that information in a space, it will automatically be updated in Facebook. So now, let's take a look at his friends page and assume that these friends have done the same thing. They've wired their profile data to get their current address. And if I refresh the page, you can see that Jack's location has changed. So basically, wherever his friends are at any given time, this shows the current location. Now, Facebook also exposes the web clipboard icon for copying this data from his friends page with a feed for updates. So I'm going to copy that, and now I'm going to go to Excel. So this is another example of the desktop converter. So what's happened here is I copy a list of friends, a list of H cards, and our desktop converter is going to convert it into a format that Excel understands. So if I simply paste in, I can see this in a tabular format. I mean, that's interesting, but what's really cool is I can paste the same clipboard data into this Windows Live map gadget that he has. And what's going to happen is it's going to subscribe to that feed of friends eventually. And you see those same friends here. And every few seconds, it's going to update. Now let's see. Well, eventually it'll update, and his friends' locations get updated automatically, and you can see them move around on the map. Okay. Well, take my word for it. Okay, so the final part of the demo, here you see a Flickr feed, and this looks the same as any other Flickr feed, but we've added two things. One is a live clipboard control to copy the feed itself, and the other is we've added controls for each individual image. And you might ask, what's the point of that? Well, today what you can do is right-click, save as, save the image itself. That's fine. But with this, the site actually has, they have the option of putting whatever they want on the clipboard, so they can say, I'll give you a URL for a high-resolution version of this image, et cetera. Right? So I'd copy that from that thumbnail, and now when I go into Explorer here, I'm just going to Control-V, and you see the image got pasted, but what's more, it's a higher resolution version of that image. Now let me go back to Flickr, and this time I'm going to copy the feed. So Flickr exposes feeds for tags, basically. So in this case, the Studio Glass tag, and that feed will contain, maybe the most recently posted images with that tag. So I copied that. I'm going to go back to Explorer, and this time I'm going to paste here, and you see it actually pasted a folder. Now, if I look in there, this folder has the images out of that feed, and these are all the high-res images. So a lot went on behind the scenes there. When I copied Flickr, put the live clipboard format onto CF text, and we have the various feeds that contain these images. And when I pasted into Explorer, our desktop app here, monitored and saw that paste, and at that point went and looked at the feed, saw that it contained media, and went ahead and downloaded those enclosures, and then put those as well. You want to explain exactly? Okay. So it puts it into the native Windows clipboard formats like CF file, etc. And so Explorer itself didn't have to be modified at all. It's just standard Windows clipboard formats.
You want to show the feed file?
What's that?
The feed file.
Oh, yeah.
It's at the end.
Right. So you see in the same folder, there's actually a file now associated with that feed. So you could think of building a service that goes and periodically updates the images from that feed and keeps this folder always in sync with the latest images from the Flickr feed.
Right. So again, the idea when we're talking about by value, by reference, you can see how by value is copying the pictures and putting them into the Windows Explorer. And then we talk about the by reference. The idea is that not only do you get the folder, you can create a feed subscription. And that little feed file is the metadata to establish the subscription itself. So as time goes on, we absolutely envision working with the RSS platform team to build upon that and really take advantage of that functionality so we get to piggyback off the things they're thinking about that we're not, like the security of the content you're downloading, et cetera. But again, hopefully what you've seen is the concept of copy. It's simple. Paste, it's simple. It's not necessarily in the user's mind what the data formats are, how to do it. But so we are going to move on to the next section. And again, please hold your questions. We're going to try to get through all the demos we can and then hopefully have questions at the end. But we've just covered live clipboard. And the next section is essentially talking about simple sharing extensions. So simple sharing extensions is another concept that Ray introduced in November of last year. And the primary reason why it came to be was that Ray saw a lot of challenges for data that existed today. Challenges for how you share it. Take calendar data as an example. You have different calendaring systems for corporate use versus your home use. You have web apps that you can use versus desktop apps. You have shared calendars versus private calendars. And each one has its own protocol for exchanging information. If you want to go from web app to desktop app, that's one protocol. If you want to go from mobile device to desktop device, that's another protocol. So that's one example of the problem that we're trying to address with respect to simple sharing extensions. Like, how can we somehow unify that? It's not just relegated to calendar data. I mean, another example that we clearly saw was contact data. So you can have contacts from your enterprise directory. You can have contacts from your own contact list, from your Windows Messenger list, from your own buddy list in AOL, et cetera. And some of these contacts you might decide to share with coworkers, some you might share with your family, and so on. But again, there's no good way to have all that information shared seamlessly in all the different mediums. In essence, Ray believed that the industry wasn't yet designed for the concept of a mesh model, where information can be shared and essentially published from multiple sources, and then subsequently not just consumed, but modified and then republished. So what you're hopefully going to see is not just a mechanism for subscription, but how to modify what you subscribe to and then republish it back out. Today, one of the things you're probably familiar with is that websites and service providers, if they provide a contact management systems, they typically want to own the data. You can enter your data, you can modify it, but it's really limited in that venue. There's no good way to necessarily export it unless it's something like export to vCard, and then a lot of manual steps come into play. So simple sharing extensions was created to create a uniform way to share information, have it synchronized because of the republishing aspect, and also support a mesh model, crossing corporate boundaries versus personal boundaries, private versus public. So What is Simple Sharing Extensions, also known as SSE? Well, Simple Sharing Extensions is an extension itself to the RSS 2.0 specification. And the idea is to allow bidirectional publishing and subscribing of information. Today, those of you familiar with RSS know that you can easily consume feeds. You can subscribe to feeds and get information updates. What we're hoping to do is piggyback off of that model and provide a way to republish that information back out. It also is designed to provide a multi-master replication algorithm. It's a fancy way of saying that everyone has the ability to modify the information and it isn't all owned by a server. In the model that we see right now, there is no single authoritative data store. So we chose RSS because of its adoption. It's widely adopted, but one thing to keep in mind is that while SSE is currently based on RSS, it's by no means limited to it. The concepts could be applied to other formats like Atom, like OPML, and in the future, we can probably see those becoming realized in more implementations. But right now, we're starting off with RSS. So how does it work? Well, in the spirit of trying to keep it simple, we wanted to essentially add extensions to the RSS content, but minimal extensions. The idea was that we're going to make two changes to an RSS feed. We're going to add a section that declares references to aggregated as well as full feeds, and we're also going to add an element to each item in an RSS feed that is in our namespace. And the purpose of this item is to provide information that's used by the replication algorithm. So again, keep in mind that the goal is not only to consume information and republish, but it's to make sure things get synchronized. That's another important aspect of SSE. So we have a ton of RSS readers out in the market today, and they can absolutely consume an SSE feed because we're not breaking how RSS works. But we do need to keep in mind that to fully take advantage of simple sharing extensions, these readers or these applications do need to be changed or modified to take advantage of what SSE is providing. In other words, look at those elements that we are adding to the item elements and understand how to manipulate them. So what do I mean by you have to modify the application? Well, the idea is that SSE deals with the creation, modification, deletion, and merging of information. Again, think about the idea of consuming information, modifying it, republishing it back out. We need an algorithm so that when you consume a republished feed from content that you published in the first place, that a merge has to occur so that all of the data, at the end of the day, when everyone has subscribed, all of the data looks the same. In other words, it's deterministic. So the idea, again, behind SSE and how it differs from RSS is it doesn't just stop at the subscription. I don't just say, cool, I've subscribed. I also, in turn, publish a feed that someone else will subscribe to. So the idea would be I would have a feed, Matt will have a feed, I'll subscribe to his, he'll subscribe to mine, we've cross-subscribed. Now we're sharing information. Whatever Matt has in his feed, I'll get. Whatever I have in my feed, he'll get. And we share that information at that point. So if I make a subsequent modification to any information, whether I created it in the first place or Matt had created it, it will replicate and it will show up on Matt's device when he reads my feed again, and vice versa. So there's a lot of interesting aspects to SSE. We can talk about some of the non-goals of SSE. And a couple of the non-goals is things like preventing duplicates of information. When you think about contacts and calendar entries, it's quite common for people to have individual and different references to the same entity. You know, Matt and I might both share a plumber in common, and we might have our own reference to it. If we share our feeds, there'll be a duplicate of the information. It's not a goal of SSE to prevent that duplicate. What we're hoping is that the applications built on top of SSE will provide a mechanism by which those conflicts, those duplicates of information can be resolved, and hopefully by a user. Again, keep in mind that there is no single authoritative data store. There is no single owner of the data once you start cross-subscribing because you're sharing that information. And that's really the power of the mesh. You're sharing the information using RSS. So we've had a lot of questions in the past about people trying to say, well, could you add this to the spec? Can you make it richer to support my application XYZ? we're definitely listening, but please keep in mind that, again, the first S in SSE, simple, we're really trying to keep it simple and have a minimal barrier for people to adopt this. So we encourage feedback and comments, and we'll provide some mailing list information at the end of the slide, but keep that in mind. SSE is a basic, it is a data format and a replication algorithm, and that's really what it is. It's nothing more than that. So we're going to go on to the demo. I'll hand over to Matt.
So we need to go to split screen now. Okay. Whoops. Okay, so earlier on in the demo, we showed how Ray copied a feed from his Facebook friends into this Windows Live gadget. And I mentioned that it was a feed to his friends, but let's take a look at what that feed actually is. Oh. Okay, whatever. So it's actually an SSE feed, and as he mentioned, that is an RSS feed with the additional extensions for synchronization. So when he subscribed to that feed, what actually occurred was he added a new subscription to the SSE feed, and it merged it into his MSN contacts, which this gadget is then displaying. So back here, we see a simple UI that's showing his MSN contacts now. And you see that the contacts that came from that Facebook feed are now a part of that. Over here, you see the feed itself coming from his MSN contacts. So what's really happened is we've subscribed to an SSE feed from Facebook, merged it into his MSN contacts, and now he's republishing a feed of his MSN contacts, which now include those contacts. So you see, here, all these contacts actually came from Facebook. You can see that it is a valid RSS item, but this is what's interesting for SSE. This is a valid RSS extension, the sync tag, and basically we have a unique ID for the item, which needs to be globally unique for all SSE endpoints, a version, which is basically any time that item is changed by any endpoint, the endpoint itself increments the version. And then flags for deleted and conflict, which aren't important right now. And then you see here this history section. This keeps track of, the last n changes to that item. So right now there's just one change. It gives you the date and time that it was changed, and also an ID for the endpoint which changed it. And this is used to determine during merging which copy of the item is the winner versus the loser, and also to detect whether there have been conflicting changes. Okay, so on this other machine, let's say this is my Windows Live page, and this is showing my MSN contacts. Right now I only have 2, so we'll show Ray's over here and mine here. Now, let's say I go to the same page for Ray, and you see this is his contacts. Just assume this is a nice looking page. We didn't have time to make anything look too cool. It's over on this side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the SSE feed for his MSN contacts, and now I'm going to go to my Windows Live page, paste that in, and you see that they've been merged in. Now, the interesting thing is they didn't just get merged in locally to the gadget, although they could have, but in this case, the gadget notified the MSN contact server that we should enter a new SSE subscription. So the server itself performed the SSE synchronization logic, merged it in, and then the gadget reloaded the contacts from that server. And you can see that this was my feed before. It just had 2 items. And now if I reload it, now you see that it has all the items that I got from Ray's store. And once this is, well, there's one more step, which is to set up true cross-subscription. Now Ray is going to come to my page, copy my SSE feed, and then paste it into his gadget. Now, the interesting thing is you see that nothing new showed up here, and that's because all of the contacts that I'm republishing originally came from his feed anyway. So you're not seeing a bunch of duplicates. It knows that even though it's now coming from my feed, that's the same item that he already has, right? So let's see what we can do now. Let's say for this contact, which we now both have, right? Ray, actually it'd be more interesting if over here on mine, let's take a look at one of the contacts that I got from Ray. Let's say this guy here, I say, oh, hey, I know him. Let me enter an address for him. I know where he works. So I'll come over here. Save this. Right, so now you see that location is showing up for that contact. And you'll also see that over here, if you look at my feed again, I'm just going to have to find him. Right. You see there's an update. So that is the update that I just made. So the latest version is always in the history element, and then any previous updates get added as elements under this section. So let's go back to Ray's gadget. And you can see, actually, it's already there because this gadget is periodically resubscribing to the SSE feed, and you see that it does the merge. So basically what we're trying to show here is that even though I got the item from Ray, I can make updates to that item. He'll get them. We can both be updating the same item. As long as there's no conflict, we're fine. If we both make independent updates and then do a merge, then SSE detects that there's a conflict and basically saves it picks a winner, but it also preserves the losing change so that an application could maybe present both versions to the user, who could then manually merge them, or maybe it would automatically merge them, and then do another update for the merged version, which would then be the current item. Okay?
So what we're going to do is one last demo, and then we're going to take questions. So we kind of started off with Live Clipboard, and then we went to a really advanced example of Live Clipboard plus simple sharing extensions. And what we're going to do now is we're going to show a basic demo of just simple sharing extensions. So I'm going to set that up real quick. So essentially what we're looking at here, again, we're going down to the level of where is there value in just simple sharing extensions itself. So what you're looking at here is a really simple gadget. And the idea is that people can create a list and they can share that list. That's all it does. But again, using simple sharing extensions, those additional elements within a standard RSS feed. So we have Matt on the left-hand side, I'm on the right-hand side, and the idea is that we can add in entries. I can put in some things here, it doesn't really matter, something interesting. Each of these items, if we look at, as I select them, and you look at the grayed out fields at the bottom, that's metadata. That's the SSE, the Simple Sharing Extensions information. You'll see things like what is the content of the item, which is represented here, who created it, when, what's the ID for the item, again talking to Matt's statement that we do have to create globally unique identifiers. And then what's the version? I chose a starting point of 1. As each one of these items gets updated, we'll see that not only does the item get updated, but the version gets updated as well. So the idea is we're keeping that history. We're going on with each change to keep a history. Now, in and of itself, if I go over here and I'm adding entries as Matt, again, this is not super duper interesting because all we're doing is we've created a gadget that shows a list. What does become interesting is the moment we start to add a subscription. So in this case, what we have done is we didn't really have a backing store to represent the storage for the content. So what we're doing right now is we're using network drives. We just have a network share drive that we're going to map to each other for subscription. So I'm going to enter in, and you'll have to forgive me. This is demo stuff here. So this is the IBM, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to say add. Okay. The gadget in its right now has a 30-second timer. And the idea is that every 30 seconds it's going to pull for a change. While we're waiting for the change on that machine, I'm going to go over to this machine, and I'm going to add a subscription back. So what we're waiting for, again, is that refresh period for each of these machines to see each other, and hopefully the demo gods are with us. Probably should have edited the demo for a lower time. Oh, the demo gods are not with us. Well, in this case, let's just say that there's a network connectivity issue. The idea here is that as these subscriptions are being pulled every 30 seconds, that information is getting updated. That's what the hourglass represents right now. We're actually going out, we're grabbing the subscription, we're trying to get the content from that feed, we're trying to merge it into our feed. And I'm afraid right now, because of some networking issues, that we're not actually going to see this quite in action. But hopefully, the end result is trying to be simplistic in that you can create a list, you can publish it. All right, well,
that's fine.
You can create a list, you can publish it, and then you can share it. And then once the list is shared, regardless of who originated the content, anyone can update it and then republish it. So that's the whole goal behind SSE. So if we could go back to Mirror on the screens. So for those of you who have been following Live Clipboard and Simple Sharing Extensions, you might be asking, what have we done since the original announcements? With respect to Live Clipboard, we've been working with numerous groups, internally and externally, to try to get more and more ideas of how to make Live Clipboard better. We're trying to produce ideas. We're coming out with a specification, but it's by no means something that we're saying, this is it, it's final. We really want to hear from the community. We want people to give us feedback to help Live Clipboard become more adopted. We have spoken with product groups within Microsoft, and we're trying to see how they can leverage the concepts of Live Clipboard within their own products. And again, if you look at one of the URLs here, we actually have a formal specification now, version 0.91 of the Live Clipboard format. We encourage you guys to go check it out and look at it. There's also a discussion list. Please join the discussion list and start asking questions about Live Clipboard, because we want this to be an organic thing. We don't want to necessarily be the keepers of it. We just want to start it. The same thing with simple sharing extensions. There's a lot of interesting uses of the concept of sharing contact and calendar information, and we are working with the appropriate groups of Microsoft to figure out how SSE can play a part in that. We are also building a lot of internal prototypes, some of which work, and the idea is that we can demonstrate more value where we have information that's flowing back and forth between heterogeneous systems, and we're trying to make it as easy as possible. So take a look at all these references, and with that, I think we'll open up the floor to any questions that you might have.
And you can get all these links from Ray's blog, so you don't have to write all of them down. But
right. So if there are any questions, we'd be happy to entertain them right now. Go ahead.
Right.
So what's being done to make those visual cues a little bit better as far as what you're getting when you copy?
So part of that is the control itself gives you some events or callbacks for, sure, the question was, sometimes it's difficult to know what is actually being copied when you copy from the live clipboard icon, right? Is that?
Yeah, it's pretty clear.
Right, I mean, you could copy static data, you could copy feeds, et cetera, and which we showed in the demo, and it's sometimes hard to know what was actually put on the live clipboard at that time.
It always looks like you're getting the same thing, but
right.
The results can be significantly different.
Sure. So part of that is we give you events and callbacks for, when the user hovers over the icon, et cetera, you'll be notified, so you could, give some sort of visual cue. Like an example of that, if I can go back. Go back to the original demo. So on this sample page, which actually, I guess we turned that off. Did we? Yeah. Okay, well, never mind there. You could highlight, this is the contact data, or this is whatever data is going to be copied. But really, it's up to the application developer to make that clear.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think in respect to how do we help the user understand what's going on when they do that copy, it's funny, I would almost go the opposite way, as saying the user wants to do something with that data. Hopefully we can leverage Live Clipboard to put as many different representations of the data, and then when they go to paste, wherever it is they go to paste, the pasting entity can rummage through the Live Clipboard, say, listen, you have a feed, you have a piece of static data, you have a picture. What is it you would like to paste? Because I can give you, I know what's there, so I'd rather help you pick what you want to paste, not burden you with what do you want to copy.
Right, that's sort of like the paste special,
sure.
paradigm, right?
But as a user, though, if I'm going to go through the trouble of copying and pasting something, I sort of want to know what value it's going to add before I go through the trouble of actually taking that action. Sure. So in the case where I've got like a list of images, for instance, and you showed the example where I copy the image, and when I paste it, I get a high res of that image. Well, it would be nice to know beforehand what resolution I'm going to be pasting at. Am I pasting that thumbnail? Am I copying that thumbnail? Am I copying a high resolution? Do I get a choice of many different,
The interesting thing is you could actually, in the Flickr site, part of the demo, for example, they could have put multiple versions or multiple resolutions of the same image on the clipboard, and then they could use a description section of the item itself to say, high res or whatever, that kind of thing, right? And then, theoretically, when you paste, they could pop up, which version do you want, right?
Window, right?
Yeah, because in the original prototype that we had done for the Flickr demo, we actually had like little UI entries for the different resolutions. And you would move the clipboard icon to the resolution that you wanted, and then you'd say copy.
Yeah.
So I think that might be another way we can do it, which is you can make that icon just appear under the different formats. We had the upper right-hand section saying 320 by 160, 640 by 480. Yeah. So ideally, well, not ideally, an idea would be have some UI as they hover show, and then when they select that item, it's associated on the same line almost. Kind of like when you saw the XML.
Right,
next to the live clipboard icon, you're like, oh, this is XML. Right. Oh, this is a 640 by 480 image. We'd probably recommend something along those lines.
Yeah, so the menu that you drop down is actually extendable as well.
Well, the menu is, that's a good question. That I can show. That's actually the browser menu. So you saw that, when I copy and, get this out of here. Right. So when I right-click, that's the Firefox menu. It's nothing we're rendering, because at the same time, I can select that. There's an example of the callback. So using this event, this one is, when I single left click, that basically takes the focus, and I can show, hey, this is what's going to be copied. I could go edit copy. I could, I could do Control C and then click Control V. Well, it jumps around, but you get the idea, right? So we're not using the
exec command.
Yeah, we're not using exec command. We're actually behind the scenes. There's a text area that contains the data, and it gets channeled through that. So, so if whatever browser you're using is responsible for the context menu itself.
Yeah, so we would say add more icons as you hover, like when Matt had clicked the button and got the callback, like it's been selected, or as you hover, trap those events in your code and have UI start to show up.
Okay. Thanks.
Sure. Are the mics on? Oh.
Right. We'll repeat the question.
Go ahead. So the question is, the real Windows clipboard, is it being used and is it being written to or manipulated by JavaScript? And the answer is yes and no. The Windows clipboard is being used. We're putting CF text on the Windows clipboard, but there's no JavaScript code executing to actually put the content on the clipboard. It is the right-click or it's the edit copy menu of the browser itself that is taking the content out of that text area Matt was mentioning and putting it onto the clipboard. So it's really subtle, but it's important, because that means that typical security issues that arise from dealing with the clipboard in Firefox or IE, we sidestep those because we're not trying to have code programmatically get access or provide information to the clipboard. We're saying if you're a user and you're using the browser to do it, we're going to leverage the browser semantics to do the copy and the paste. And that's what allowed us to get cross-browser compatibility with Firefox and Safari.
I can show you. If we can switch to the backup machine, I can give you an example of that. Okay.
Yeah.
No, so that sort of begs the second question then, which is CF text is limited in the amount of information that you can put in that copy. So we couldn't copy like a large picture.
Yep.
You could copy a link to a picture.
That's right. So the question is, the CF text format on the Windows clipboard it can be limited in size. It's based on the OS at that point and what they define for the maximum length of a text field. So if you had a large image to copy, arguably even a 1 megabyte image, you might blow, if there was a limit of like 32K, you might blow that limit. And this is why essentially we have 3 sections of the live clipboard format. We have a data format, we have a feeds format, and a presentation format. Ideally, we'd render the feed or the data as a URL to the actual content to go get it, to always keep the live clipboard XML fragment as small as possible. So in other words, we wouldn't necessarily start recommending, go base 64 encode all your images and put it into the live clipboard format, and that should be your mechanism. We'd rather say keep it small, create references to other locations so that when the paste operation occurs, the pasting application can go get the content as necessary.
All right, then the last question is that I can't remember the last time I actually used right-click to copy things.
Yep.
I used keyboard accelerators. So what are the thoughts about that?
So the question was, it's not common for many people to necessarily use the right-click menu option on these. What are the opportunities to leverage keyboard operations or other standard menus? And
yeah, so you don't need to use right-click. I just was doing it because it's easier to show, but you can Control-C, Control-V, you can tab through them, Control-C, you can, edit copy. So
yeah,
there's no requirement to use right-click. I mean, I'll show you, for example, to try to answer a couple of your questions. This is probably the most complicated feed. If you can see it over there. Can we get the backup on mirrored screens? You could tab. Yeah, you have to select it somehow. Okay, so let me copy from this live clipboard format. Go over here, and well, I can show you in Notepad that it is CF text, but it'll be easier to see here. This is coming from CF text. We have vCard format. So this is the HCard micro format. Each of those friends is its own item, and then under feed, we have the actual RSS feed that we pulled to get those friends. It also tells you where the data itself is for those contacts. So and also can map back. So this section is actually saying, in that feed, the item with this GUID maps to this contact or this item that is statically on the live clipboard.
Yeah, and in regards to like the Control-C, Control-V, I think one thing to note is when we went to Firefox and we had this page, where's the sample page?
Last one.
So the way Control-C, Control-V we had envisioned it working is there is a selection operation first. So you can see how it got highlighted.
Right, and you can even go to a different, I could go over here and let's see. I could go over here, highlight that one, go back, it's still selected,
Right.
Control-C, now Control-V, right? So it'll hold selection even,
Right.
when you
So
change
we would
that.
absolutely encourage people to have Keyboard Accelerator handling code. So when you get that Control-C after the focus has been given to a particular piece of data, that when the copy operation occurs, your code gets a callback, and you decide what gets on the clipboard. And in this case, you're deciding that it's what's selected.
Right, but you don't even need, you don't need to do anything special to handle Control-C because the control itself, this live clipboard control, which we have posted up on Arrayspace, you can download it and try it out. It handles all of that for you. So whether they use Control-V or right-click paste or edit paste, you get the same event. You just get the data that they pasted.
Right. By the way, this page that you're looking at here, when we look at the references again, this is a page you can try out. You can look at the source code. We have the format spec, so you can look at it and play around with it. And if you have any questions, again, we encourage you to post stuff up to the discussion list because we do want to hear from you.
Right, and I think the following session after this, Nikhil is going to actually show live clipboard again in another context. And he's actually developed a prototype of an Atlas, control or, he has an Atlas component that you can actually download and play with if you'd rather use that form. So we actually have it in two flavors now. We'll have the Atlas component, and we also have, the one that I've been using, which is linked to on Ray's page that you can download, and that's just a script that has a callback model rather than the Atlas binding model.
Are there any other questions that we could cover at this time? And feel free to come see us afterwards if you want to ask us additional questions on the venue. But that's all we have for now. So thank you very much for coming. We appreciate your time.
Thanks.
And we hope you check these things out. And please do fill out your session evaluations. They're important to someone.